Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Lorenzo Grandi. I am the founding director of the City Diplomacy Lab, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the Cities and Climate Solution Food webinar. This webinar is hosted by Columbia Global Center Paris and Rio de Janeiro, and by the City Diplomacy Lab. Today's webinar is part of the Cities and Climate Solution series, whose goal is focus on the climate challenges faced by cities worldwide and to identify, analyze, and share their solutions. This series originates in the observation of the primary urban nature of today's transnational challenges, and that the global trends of urbanizations and decentralization are enhancing everywhere cities' ambitions to provide solutions. And we are fortunate today to have with us exceptional speakers whose job is precisely to design solutions and to collaborate as much with local actors as with fellow cities across the world in their implementation. Starting from the farthest to the nearest, I welcome Ms. Thalita Ferraz, local diplomacy advisor at the city of Rio de Janeiro. As part of Rio's International Department Office, she has been advocating for public policies, development, and rights-based international agenda, along with international organizations and city networks such as C40, UCLG, UCSI, IOPD, and the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, for which she is directly involved in the conceptualization and organization of its global forum hosted in Rio in 2022. Thalita holds an MA in International Relations from the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro in 2015. Milagros de Hots currently serves as a senior policy advisor at the New York City Mayor's Office of Food Policy, where she is responsible for advancing the work at the intersection of food, environment, and climate. She works across city agencies with local, state, and regional leaders to advance sustainable and low-carbon food initiatives and represents New York City in national and international coalition that focus on these efforts. Milagros received a bachelor in biology and a concentration in plant genetics from the University of Buenos Aires and a master's in environmental policy and sustainability management from the New School. And Ms. Elisa Porreca is a food policy officer with the city of Milan, where she focuses on a range of issues for the Milan food system, in particular the reduction of food waste and food aid systems answering to food poverty. In parallel, she contributed to the drafting and implementation of European projects on food policies and the exchange of knowledge with international cities active in sustainable food system. She is now serving as project officer for the European Food Trail project. She graduated in linguistic and cultural mediation and then studied food systems at the Master Food and Society. So Elisa, Milagros, and Thalita, welcome to the webinar. Before we dive into the topic at hand, a few house rules. You will find at the bottom of your screen the Q&A icon, and I invite you all to use it throughout the webinar to write down your question that our speaker will answer in the second part of our event, which will last a total of 1 hour. So let me now say just a few words to set the scene for our discussion, which focuses on the link between cities and food. This link has always been very close. We have to go back in time at least 4,000 years and look at the Sumerian city of Ur, the first urban center to exceed 100,000 inhabitants, to notice that the prerequisite for the rise of cities is precisely the ability to feed their population. And this refers to a twofold challenge that remains very important to this day. First is food security, that is access to food. And then there is food safety, meaning it is safe and healthy to eat such food. Those are challenges that belongs to every city in the world, which not surprisingly are showing a growing commitment to it. But of course, urban societies face additional challenges today: pollution, climate change, and a growing inequality. Challenges that find their peak in cities, considering this century open with a transformation of humanity from a rural to an urban species as a result of the global trend of urbanization. This dynamic, coupled with that also global of decentralization, has prompted more and more cities to want to devote themselves directly to food safety and security in a holistic way, combining consideration of public health, equity, economic development, and climate action. Ambitious strategies in which the cities present today have developed innovative approaches that do not fail to inspire their peers around the world, with whom they are in close dialogue, by the way. Indeed, the three cities are members of the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, an international network of cities launched in 2015 with the very aim of strengthening the global movement for sustainable food on an urban scale. So thanks to Milagros, Elisa, and Talita, we will find out what a food policy is and why it is desirable to establish one based on its impact and its adaptability to different urban contexts. We will talk about how food is also, but I would say above all, a matter of population empowerment in building a future aligned with local expectations. And finally, we will explore the links with other priorities shared by cities, fighting inequality of all kinds, combating climate change, public health, and education. I propose to start with a first round of table devoted to portraying the urban food scene of the participating cities. So I will start with Milagros, and I would like to ask her to please share your city-specific food-related needs and how your municipality is responding.
Sure. Thank you, Lorenzo and Andrew, for having me today. I'm representing the city of New York, and in the city of New York, there is, as you know, we don't grow a lot of our food, so a lot of our food comes from other parts of the country, the region, and abroad. So for this reason, we created a food policy plan that is a 10-year food policy plan to really think about how we can, as a city, transform our own food systems and beyond. This was a very strong collaborative effort with many other city agencies, community-based organizations, and businesses. And we set out 5 goals for us as a city that we are reporting on every 2 years to see how we're doing progress towards these 5 goals. The first goal is really about making sure that all New Yorkers have multiple ways of accessing healthy, affordable, and culturally appropriate food. This is really important for us right now, and I can talk a little bit more about like what it is that we're doing. The second goal of this comprehensive plan is to make sure that New York City's food economy drives economic opportunity and provides good jobs, because we understand that the food sector in New York City is very, very strong, but not always the jobs in that sector are good paying jobs. Then the other goal is to make sure that the supply chains that feed New York City are modern, efficient, and resilient. And part of this is a big investment that the state and the city are doing in Hunts Point, that is our biggest wholesale market here in New York City, in the South Bronx, for those who know New York City or are from New York City. The fourth goal is that the New York City's food is produced, distribute, and dispose of sustainably. And on that, we are expanding composting across the 5 boroughs by 2024. This is really important to try to get food waste out of our landfills and decrease emissions from the decomposition of the food waste. And finally, and this is like very in line with our participation with the Milan Food Policy Pact and C40 and other networks, is really trying to support systems of knowledge to implement this plan, because we understand that as city government, we don't have all the tools and sometimes all the power to make these things happen. So making sure that we're working with all the stakeholders along the way to make sure that we're really transforming the food system. So as just a very overview of what we're doing for goal 1 to make sure that New Yorkers have multiple ways to access healthy, affordable, and culturally appropriate food. We're working with the Department of Health to make sure that folks who are getting food through our benefits that we call SNAP get extra points or extra credits, for example, when they spend those dollars in fruit, vegetables, and food that are good for them. So we do this with retailers, we do this with our farmers markets, and this has been very successful as a little nudge for folks to spend money in better food. Something that also came out of like COVID was like a really overhaul of our emergency food system. We have a lot of pantries, a lot of churches help out people in need, and the city provides food for a lot of those pantries. Right now, we just revamped how the city and how the pantries can get food to make sure that they have access to fresh and culturally appropriate food. And all of this is something that we're doing in partnership with other agencies and really using lessons learned from COVID. New York City had a task force on racial inclusion and equity that really show which were the neighborhoods hit the hardest by COVID. And we're making sure that our food policies are prioritizing those neighborhoods. So I'll stop there and we can talk more later.
Thank you very much, Milagros. I can see that you have a holistic approach to the many dimensions related to food and the city. And I also noticed that you mentioned this very important element of assessing, being able to identify the impact and then partner up with the different actors. So it's a multi-stakeholder approach that I think aligns with the experiences also of the other cities. And now I would like to give the floor to Elisa. Welcome, Elisa, and ask you what is the portrait of the food system in Milan and what is the Milanese food policy planning to do?
So thank you, Lorenzo, and thank you also to the other speakers. I'm sorry for, you can see that my setup is a bit moving maybe around me, but it's a story of delayed flights. Anyway, I'm very happy to be able to join today. So just to be very briefly giving an overview of the commitment of Milan, the roots of what we have been doing are we can find them back to 2015 when we hosted the expo in Milan. And at the same time, the city understood the value of launching both a local approach and an international approach. So speaking in particular about the local approach, we launched the 5 priorities that were addressing access to healthy food, sustainable productions, food education, the reduction of food waste, and a support for scientific research in the agro-food sector. Of course, let's say the work that started in 2015 has been evolving through the years. And of course, the crisis that came after the pandemic reshaped a bit our priorities. But in the end, our main commitment and what we have been trying to do, and I think it's quite similar to what Milagros just shared, is the need for partnership and the need for providing this holistic approach that cannot come just from the municipality being committed on sustainability issues for the food system, but also the commitment on bringing on these initiatives with the civil society organizations, with the universities, with other public bodies, and of course with the private sector. In particular, we are trying right now concerning the private sector to develop impact financing tools to sustain in the long run our initiatives, our projects. And this, of course, cannot be done without a good monitoring of the data of the different initiatives that we carry out. And also this must be done with the support of institutions that are able to provide such polytechnical university, but also other kind of consultancy that a municipality with its power and with its vision that is also coming, of course, from the political commitment is able to gather and to even give a public spot, a public visibility that is so important when related to these topics. So this is what we are trying to do. This is also SDG number 17. So we will keep working on these 5 priorities as long as we can, and we are doing it also with a food policy department that is rooted in the structure of the administration.
Thank you very much, Elisa. We can see that Milan took the opportunity of this global event to connect this global challenge to its local roots and identify local solutions. Once again, this idea of the partnership for this goal, it's something that enables a municipality to go farther afield from what it could implement alone. So it's a matter of identifying the right local actors and certainly introduce a shared political vision and a sort of concept of co-creation, co-responsibility. I would like now to move to the other side of the Atlantic, to Rio de Janeiro, and ask Talita what are the specific needs, the challenges of the city of Rio de Janeiro, and how the municipality is responding to them.
Thank you, Lorenzo and Andrew, and good afternoon to everyone. Good evening. And also say hello to colleagues of the Milan Pact, the Columbia Center in Rio, and to colleagues of this conversation, Elisa and Milagros. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a responsibility and honor also to represent the city of Rio in this dialogue. As a representative of a city of the Global South, I'll start by mentioning the paradoxical reality of countries like Brazil, where growth economy is based on commodities, and Brazil is the 3rd largest producer and exporter of food in the world. And in 2002, data shows that more than 33 million people are back in a situation of food insecurity, which means also 15% of this population is in a situation of hunger or severe insecurity. 57% of the country's urban population face some degree of food insecurity, and that means they do not eat the way they should. And public and economic policies are required for the sake of the population and the whole society in Brazil. And public policy on food and fight against hunger dates back in the 40s in Brazil, but I think this is another conversation. Regarding to Rio, Rio is the 2nd largest metropolis of the country with a population of 6.7 million people. And in 2020, more than 560,000 families of the city, located in the city, were in a situation of poverty or extreme poverty. And as we know, these inequalities and poverty rates has worsened since the pandemic years. So after this context, like it's worth mentioning now that in Rio, the different cities departments approach different aspects and pillars of food and nutrition issues, and which leads to different policies. And some of them are integrated or shared between different departments. I will mention 5 initiatives, and I think this can showcase how the municipality responds to food-related issues, and it's been developing its resilience toward climate change and the crisis. The Health Secretariat integrates the Food Surveillance Department, which among many initiatives is ahead of updating the food procurement. Rio is one of the pioneer cities which the legislation states that 30% of food in schools should be organic and from local markets. And the Hortas Cariocas program, it's led by the Secretary of Environment and Climate. It was created in 2006 and aims at reducing the food insecurity of families living in social vulnerability, creating jobs, generating income, and keeping young people away from crime. And the Hortas Cariocas program, it's the organic gardening is present today in 29 communities, 27 schools of the Municipal Education Network. And over 16 years, the program, which received 3 awards, one of from the Milan Pact, has produced around 1,000 tons of food, benefiting more than 10,000 families. And in 2022, the production has exceeded 59 tons of food. These are the most stated actions that have a sustainable food system with incentives for organic family agriculture production. It's the agricultural production, the small producers are the ones who actually produce the food that we consume in cities. And moving forward, the public company in charge of the waste management managed a pilot unit of biomethanization, which transforms the organic waste of the city into renewable energy through the use of biogas and organic compost. And most of the compost generated is used and distributed to the organic gardens of the city, which completes the waste and food circle in the city. And the last 2 programs are interrelated and were launched in 2021 as emergent measures to tackle hunger and undernutrition in the city, as I contextualized earlier. One program is the community kitchens, that some 55 kitchens located in many areas of the city and managed in partnership with NGOs and distributed more than 3.7 million meals per year. And another program, which is the Prato Feito Carioca, it's a program of income distribution to informal workers through a card, which can only be used to buy meal and food. Both initiatives sum around $14 million of public investment per year. Finally, it's just worth highlighting that how these policies are mostly focused on assisting the population, addressing inequalities, which can be different of other regions of the world. And also worth mentioning that food insecurity in Rio and in Brazil has race and gender intersectional issues that are now addressed and should be leveraged and better integrated with other policies. I'll stop here and I'll explain further the plan in the next question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thalita. We can see the importance of assessing, of mapping the situation to be able to then custom-made solutions. And I think it's very evident that your action goes across the different dimensions of sustainability, the environmental, the social, the economic component of the city to organize a very comprehensive solution in partnership once again with the local actors. And I would like now to move on to a second round of questions, which focuses on the acknowledgement that we are unfortunately living in a period of multiple crises. So we experienced, of course, the pandemic. There are wars, economic crisis, growing inequality. And this calls for urgent strategic vision in order to target the sustainable development and the resilience to make it possible on the urban level. So how is the future of food being prepared in your city? What expectation from the specific cooperation, the city-to-city cooperation that is already uniting your three cities? I would start with Elisa.
Yes, thank you, Lorenzo. Once again, speaking about crisis and speaking about the response that must come from cities, we can, as Talita just shared, we should look first and foremost to the mapping of the new context that is always changing, but having a baseline and then understanding where to adapt is for sure a good start. At the same time, what we always try to implement also through the commitment of the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact is the promotion of a collective understanding and to make resources available to cities that are part of this network, but that in general are interested in these topics and how to better adapt, is to make the knowledge available and shared. And this has been carried out in so many contexts in these past years. Of course, we had the promotion of good practices coming from the awards, so the Milan Pact Awards, so this kind of recognition that also Rio was protagonist of, but also other kind of resources available to fund these activities must be included in the strategic objectives of cities, because of course the challenges that we might encounter at some point may be already addressed in other contexts. And at the same time, we kind of see these cross-cutting topics touching almost all the cities, because we are very used to think about the global north maybe as a place in which cities are very well equipped with strategies, but COVID showed us all around the world how unprepared we were and how big is the need for contingency plans when facing unforeseen events, while also we know for sure that the challenges posed by the climate change are not very much unforeseen. And an example is what we experienced last year with the beginning of a drought period in the north of Italy, that affected greatly the urban and peri-urban production in the area of Milan, and how also in this case the collaboration among departments, so not only the food policy but water management, agriculture, and even waste with the water management system was crucial to try and provide some kind of mitigation of the effects coming from such an event. So yeah, promotion of and raising awareness of solutions that are already there, and also again partnerships.
Thank you so much, Elisa. We can see that despite the geographical distance of cities, different socioeconomical conditions, cultural frameworks, there is a number of shared challenges that cities find, of course, understandably interesting to collaborate with. And so I would like to now move the virtual microphone to Talita. Your work is, in fact, inside of a Department of International Relations. So I would like to ask you also, what is your experience in this construction of a future aligned with the expectation, the needs of a city which is growing, expanding with different challenges, but that are to a certain extent shared by other cities. So what is your recipe for that?
Thank you, Lorenzo. My response for that now will be in two parts. First, I think it's worth mentioning like how these initiatives on food are being actually linked to the municipal strategic plan of government, and which was built based on the agenda, the 2030 agenda. And this plan was developed with the budgetary planning instruments, such as the budgetary guidelines law and annual budgetary law that has forecast scenarios for investment and funding of the public machine. And this means the commitments and the measures taken to guarantee the implementation of these policies. Another important point is that the alignment of these strategies, goals, and projects presented with a long-term vision anchored in the Sustainable Development and Climate Action Plan of the city. And this plan in particular, it's based on the guideline and leaving no one behind. And this means also that the plan concentrates the resources in areas, which in Rio is the north and west zones, that absorb more than 70% of the investments, making it possible to generate opportunities and speed the development and poverty reduction. And with the increased evidence that the triple planetary crisis is exacerbating the situation and disproportionately affecting different communities, and the various factors that are fueling the transition to diets that tend to be low nutritional quality and high environmental footprint, I think the expectation is that multilateralism continues to play this fundamental role in terms of amplifying the voices of territories internationally, enhancing national and international support for the whole of local and regional governments, and in this policy implementation. And as from the city diplomat space, we believe that the Milan Pact and city networks, these spaces have been important in promoting these good practices, exchanges, and maybe the most important is promoting the peer pressure among the members, which means as we see cities, neighbors implementing new and innovation practices, it tends to motivate other cities to do the same. And I think to close, I think food policy has an advantage among other policies because it tends to have public adherence. So it's in terms of public will, it's a good practices and interests of people. And thank you. I look forward for your questions.
Thank you, Talita. And well, I note down this articulation of a truly cross-cutting approach that you have established in Rio. Also very important, your reference to the voice of territories, the voice of cities, so advocacy on the importance of the role of cities in tackling food safety, food security. And I very much enjoyed also your reference. I find it's an interesting contribution to the global debate on the role of cities in multilateralism when you talk about peer pressure, because we know that one of the limits of city diplomacy compared to foreign policy, to international relations as managed by national governments, is the fact that this is a pact and it's not a treaty, so it's not compelling. There is no legal obligation, of course, to act accordingly. It's based on the political will and the capacity, of course, of mayors to create a consensus. So it's extremely important to see how there is a dialogue, an internal dialogue, and a sort of a coming together of different cities for improving their own agenda, their own action. And so I would like now to move back to New York City Milagros, your city, of course, resonates with many of those topics that have been mentioned, the SDGs. You are an advocate, of course, of the localization of the SDGs, of the 2030 agenda, and as well as of the international role of cities. So I would like to learn more about your roadmap linking this international action and the future vision of the New York food system.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just really love how Talita said that right now we are kind of in a crisis in when our diets are reflecting like very poor nutrition, sometimes of like too much food or like empty nutrition, or sometimes not enough food in other areas, and also like high environmental footprint and impact. So in New York City, we're really trying to tackle both of those crises at the same time by making sure that we as a city and the agencies that serve food, so are serving like culturally appropriate, nutritious food. And we are really transforming our public hospitals, our public schools, our homeless shelters, senior centers, all these agencies that serve food to really serve more nutritious and less carbon intensive food. Actually, on Monday, the mayor announced 2 commitments that the city just made to decrease our carbon emissions related to food that the city purchases with city dollars. That's about like $300 million a year. We want to reduce our carbon footprint by 33% of those foods. And we also, based on what Elisa was saying, how important it is to work with the private sector, invited the private sector to join us by reducing their food-related emissions by 25% by 2030. Because again, we know that a lot of vulnerable New Yorkers eat food that the city purchases, and we can have an effect there. But we also know that many others don't. So we're looking at what are the levers that we can have to really provide better food that is better for people and for the planet as well. And these announcements are part of our climate action plan that Talita also brought up. We are also releasing a climate action plan. And this is the first time that as a city, we're looking at our emissions, not only in the boundaries of the 5 boroughs of the city of New York, but thanks to the C40 and other folks, we were able to do with the City of London an analysis of our consumption-based emissions, meaning that what are the things that the 8.6 million New Yorkers are consuming that maybe are not being produced in the city, but that have an impact on climate change, and what can we do to also like add that to our toolbox, to reduce our emissions based on what we consume, but may not be produced here. As I said earlier, not a lot of the food that we eat in New York City is not produced here, but we hope to increase food production by, we just created, for the first time, the Office of Urban Agriculture in New York City that never had one. In New York City, there are about 550 community gardens. And for the first time, we're really putting a lot of effort into improving those community gardens, increasing that, and seeing how we can be a more resilient city with our urban farms. And finally, something that also was mentioned by my co-panelists here is the collaboration between city agencies and with other cities across the globe. For example, we're working very closely with the Department of Environmental Protection because, and this is like related to food, not so clearly, but it's very interesting because the New York City water comes from upstate New York. And what the city has been doing for years to try to protect our water is to provide farmers with money and technical assistance so that they can do better management practices in their farms that are carbon smart practices, so that not only they emit less, but also there's less runoff to the water bodies that actually feed New York City. So this is, again, really looking holistically at how is New York City getting food. As Elisa said, the pandemic has taught us a lot on what we need to do. And we're looking at other cities in the US and across the globe to really learn what works and how it works, because the devil is in the details. We all need to understand how did you do that? What did it take to make sure that we as municipalities have all the tools and knowledge that we need to have the biggest impact.
Thank you very much, Milagros, and I can definitely testify of the lively exchange that cities are having on the international stage on those topics. And I think another very inspiring topic that you mentioned is this specific approach to food consumption. In a way, this shows an innovative approach of your city, where basically there is another way to look at the use of food. Usually it's seen as the responsibility of the consumer only. But we can see here that it's an active engagement of the municipality to offer alternatives, to offer another way of consuming. And in that way, you have a sort of connection with the citizens in your city, and you share a goal in this way towards better nutrition. I can see that we already have a few questions, so we will now move to the Q&A. The other participants who haven't already asked a question, they are invited, of course, to use our Q&A window on the bottom of this Zoom session. And I would start with a question coming from Alejandro Rossi from UNOPS. I would like to hear the speakers highlight from their perspective what they consider the top rewarding social innovation development in their city. So maybe we can start with Talita.
Thank you, Alejandro, for the question. I would mention, just mention the urban gardening, because of how the proportion that it takes here in Rio and the many aspects that urban gardening involves, as I mentioned in my response. But I think it's also worth clarifying or describing a little bit one of the programs from the social assistance or the food distribution that I mentioned earlier, is that it not only, the programs were developed in a way that when assisting someone in poverty or in a very vulnerable situation, it also tends to create binding that these individuals connects to other social services offered by the municipality. So by offering a card to this person, to these families, they are also invited or motivated to integrate, and sometimes creating bindings, like if the family has children, they have to be attending schools, and this kind of links between many other public services. And in the situation of the crisis, of the after pandemic worsening situations, there was innovative in this sense.
Thank you so much, Talita. I would maybe leave the floor to Milagros and then Elisa, if they also want to answer this question about what they consider the most rewarding social innovation development.
I would say something that we're seeing definitely like the fruits of the policy, but still have a long way to go, is trying to make it easier for people to make choices, food choices that are good for themselves and for the planet. I mentioned a few with the Get the Good Stuff program, the groceries to go, but something that is, to me, makes a lot of sense is make it the default choice, the better choice for health and planet. New York City provides like free school meals to all students, no questions asked. And we are pushing strongly on like plant-based diets on school cafeterias and trying to like really enhance the experience that students have in those cafeterias, how the food is prepared, how it's served. There's a group of chefs that are working with school food workers to try to like develop new recipes that are more appetizing, but at the same time are plant-based. I think this is like something that is going really well. We have Meatless Mondays and Plant Power Fridays in schools. And in our public hospitals, the default option for meals are also like plant-based. So we have shown that, you know, we're all creatures of habit. So if you make it easier for folks and help them like make it more affordable to make the right choice, they will make that choice.
Thank you, Milagros. I'm sure that among our audience, there are a lot of people taking notes and inspiration from your best practices. And I would like now to move to Elisa to highlight what she perceives as a most innovative development in the field of action, her field of action. And also, I couple this question with a second one, coming from Chinara Villa, asking if it's a question regarding the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. How would it be possible for other cities to take action? How to provide other cities the tools to promote this agenda? Please, Elisa.
Thank you. Thank you, Lorenzo. Thank you to the audience posing these questions. I would like to mention very briefly about the most interesting social innovation that I'm seeing at the moment. It's something that I came across very recently, and it is an aspect that was brought from some civil society organizations during a community of practices that we did a couple of weeks ago. And it is the fact that every year more, let's say associations that are working to provide food aid to vulnerable families in Milan are not only understanding each time more that the food losses, so this aspect that of course has some issues, is not a perfect flow that can input food aid systems, but it's for sure a resource, and they are way more organized now to recover food that is perfectly edible, and of course generating co-benefits both from the social point of view, because this food is being donated, but also from the environmental point of view, because we don't have to manage the organic waste coming from this waste. It is the fact that the audience of this kind of activities are also being involved actively in the recovery of food losses. And it is maybe it's not super innovative in itself, but it's something that was not happening before in Milan. And I think that it says a lot about how much also people in the city are understanding a bit more the effort and also the source of what is becoming food aid. Of course, that's not the only source, because we know that not all the food coming from donation can cover a healthy and nutritious diet for vulnerable people. But it is an approach, and what we are trying to do, of course, is to expand it, because we have these food waste hubs that are very, very good at recovering food at neighborhood scale. So avoiding very big commutes of organizations around the region to get this kind of donations. But we can for sure expand on that side. And it is extremely interesting to think about the expansion of these solutions with the community involved, rather than just with the top-down approach from the municipality or even from associations themselves. Concerning instead the question about the MEFPP, there are several tools that are already online on the website, and that I think it was shared in the chat, but you can just Google Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, and you can find the website. What is very easy and available is, of course, the list of the 37 recommended actions that were drafted in 2015. So bear with the limits that might come from that elaboration, because they are almost ancient at this point. No, jokes apart. What's even more interesting is a tool that was developed by FAO together with RUAF and the MEFPP. That is a set of 44 indicators useful for the monitoring of actions, and also for the assessment of how a city is working in the field of sustainability and transformation of the food system. Of course, if you are interested in opportunities, more specific opportunities of learning, both at your regional level, so let's say in the continent area in which your city is, or if you're interested in collaboration with cities outside, I mean, all around the world, I do invite you to reach out to the MEFPP Secretariat, because we are available to help cities that are willing to start this work, or that have started and just want to have new opportunities to share and learn from other experiences. So we are available.
Thank you very much, Elisa, for your comprehensive answer and your availability to interact with our interested participants. There is a final question specifically addressed to Talita. So I read it. It's from Carolina Grangeia. You've mentioned cultural challenges, and we do have structural and logistics challenges as well. Example given, a lack of adaptability measures to constrain high level of rain or waste management system, especially in favelas, which has so many stories of combating hunger with their own hands, with very good project that should gain scale. How Rio de Janeiro is dealing with these specific challenges in the new municipality plans, and how infrastructure measures are being addressed in this context.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Thank you, Carolina, for your question. It's a broad question that many aspects can be mentioned and listed regarding the topics that you mentioned. I'll start from the hunger and the development plan that was developed with the many councillors and representatives of the city in regards of mapping the situation of poverty and vulnerability of many areas of the city. It counted with CUFA, which is the unique central of favelas. So the social assistance programs could be better addressed by region. And I understand that your question is also about the resilience of the city in terms of the climate changes. And Rio has has a storm period of the year that many rains and storms happen in the end of the year and beginning of every year. And the city counts with many equipments of that are interlinked to prevent disasters, landslides, and one of them is mainly the system of alarms. When our operation center, which is the center that monitors the whole city, foresee a storm or heavy rains, there are alarm systems around the city. And to mention something that is more specific in how is the city preparing its infrastructure, there was a climate action launched this year. And it's also an effort of the city to search and to look for funds in which infrastructure for adaptation can be addressed. And I believe that is how the cities are addressed. The city is addressing and the measures and creating and development measures to what is coming and that we can really foresee, right? I hope I respond to your question, and if we are open also to discuss further if you want to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Talita, for your answer. And I would like now to propose a final, very quick round of table with a short advice that each one of you would give to a city who got inspired by your best practices and would like to start from scratch designing its own food policy. So just 30 seconds of suggestion to a city who would like to follow your path. Maybe we start with Milagros.
Sure. I can say that to any cities, probably not starting from scratch. There's people eat, so there's a lot already happening. So as we talked before, just map out what is happening, what are the businesses doing, who's bringing in the food to the city, how are people eating the food, check out what databases there are on like food consumption, food production, because that's going to help you plan. Again, you're not starting from scratch. There's a lot of people that have a lot to gain when you're talking about food policy. So make sure that you're talking to everybody and creating alliances in your own city and abroad. Because again, government alone can't do everything. So you just need collaboration.
Thank you very much, Milagros. Elisa, please.
So I will try to say something different. And maybe my advice, especially if a city is starting on its journey on the sustainability of the food system, would be to apply to calls, to awards, to the kind of opportunities that are giving a fresh start, and that are also very appreciated by the community, by the politicians, by several actors that can help the city to advance on this journey.
Thank you, Elisa. And the final advice from Talita.
Thank you. I'll actually recall the question that was addressed to me and mention that most of the times the solutions are already being taken by people in their territories. And the communities usually, by facing many challenges, they somehow know how to develop their own solutions. And it takes now the cities to be part of this conversation and make it possible to turn these solutions institutional and legislative. And that's what I would advise.
Thank you very much, all of you. I think it's very inspiring. It's also giving a sort of optimistical view and show that it is possible for all cities to follow your path, to establish their own food strategy, and also with the support and engagement of citizens and local actors, as well as the international partners, starting from the cities from all over the world. Regretfully, I think that's our time for today is come to an end. But the debate about urban solutions to climate challenges will continue in the coming months. I encourage all of you to follow the City Diplomacy Lab and the Columbia Global Centers to be updated on our upcoming events. Once again, I would like to thank our panelists for their inspiring contribution. Ms. Elisa Porrica from the city of Milan, Ms. Milagros de Oz from the city of New York, and Ms. Dalita Ferraz from the city of Rio de Janeiro. And of course, thank you very much to all of you in the audience for your kind participation and questions. Thank you and goodbye.